Okay, so now that we know this, now that we understand that the people like Lysias, they have some of the things necessary to be a philosopher. They're able to make arguments using words, and they're able to convince people to listen to them. That's part of it. But the real job of philosopher is something much bigger and more complicated and has to do with the truth. Um, so they have these examples. And Socrates says, um, Phaedrus says, I quite admit, Socrates, that the art of rhetoric which these men teach, that's, I meant rhetoric is persuasive speaking, that's like speeches. I quite admit, like Lysias, I quite admit, Socrates, that the art of rhetoric which these men teach, and of which they write, is such as you describe. There I quite agree with you, but I still want to know where and how the true art of rhetoric and persuasion is to be acquired. So Phaedrus says, listen, I agree with you. Phaedrus loves speeches, he loves words, he loves talking, he loves discourse. And he says, listen, I do agree with you that there are limits to these things. But he says, I still want to know, like, what's the right way to do it then? If this is only part of it, if this is only the preliminaries, how do we do it the right way? And Socrates says, the perfection which is required of the finished orator, an orator is a person who makes speeches, so the finished orator is like the master speech maker. The perfection of which is required of the finished orator is, or rather must be, like the perfection of anything else, partly given by nature, but may also be assisted by art. So part of it is sort of you're born with this ability, but you also got to practice, right? You got to do both. If you have the natural power and add to it knowledge and practice, you will be a distinguished speaker. And if you fall short of either of these, you will be to that extent defective. But the art, as far as there is an art of rhetoric, does not lie in the direction of Lysias or Thrasymachus. So he says Lysias is doing it wrong. He says, listen, you got to be born with a certain amount of ability to speak, but also you got to practice. You got to do them both. And if you just don't have a certain inborn power and or you don't practice, you got to do both. And if you can't do it, you're not going to be sort of good at discourse, good at words, good at speeches. So Socrates says, so he says Lysias isn't doing it right. Well, in what direction then? Socrates says, I conceive Pericles to have been the most accomplished rhetoricians. This is like an ancient speechmaker. Well, what of that? Socrates says, all the great arts require discussion and speculation about the truths of nature. Remember, art means skill. All the great arts require discussion and speculation about the truths of nature. So anything where you think, any kind of skill, you have to understand the truth behind it. For example, I'm a pretty good cook. I can cook a lot of things. Ever since this COVID thing happened, I've been cooking like crazy. But when I say I know how to cook, there's a difference between knowing how to cook and being like a proper chef. Because what I do when I cook, I don't know what you guys do, but when I get a recipe book out and I just follow the instructions in the recipe book, but I don't know why I'm doing it. Like sometimes when you cook vegetables, the recipe says just put a little tablespoon of vinegar in the vegetables at the end, cook for 30 seconds. Now, I bet that does something to the vegetables scientifically, help break them down, or I don't know what. Because they usually, at the end of cooking vegetables in the stove, I'm often asked to add vinegar or lemon juice or something and just kind of stick it in there. I don't know why. I just do it. And that's why I'm not a real chef. I'm just a guy who knows how to cook some things. Being a proper chef means understanding why you're doing all of these things. And I don't currently have that skill. I just know how to follow recipes, but I don't know why. They say bring it to a boil and then lower it. Why? I don't know. They say put this thing in first and this thing in second. And I go why? But the book doesn't tell me. All right. So Socrates is talking about. He says all the great arts require discussion and speculation about the truths of nature. So in my case, if I'm just following instructions, I'm not really learning anything about the truth of how food should be created. I don't really understand what I do it, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sure you guys have all done things in classes where you do what the professor says, but you don't really have any idea why. You don't understand it. And so Socrates says just kind of following orders and instructions and doing tricks and stuff, that's not real authentic knowledge. He says that all great arts require discussion and high speculation about the truths of nature, right? You got to think of, and by the way, notice that he wants you to find out about the truth, but also discussion and speculation. Speculation is you got to think about it, but discussion is you got to talk to other people about it. And this is why when you learn something, they send you to a school with other people because you're supposed to talk and ask questions and discuss and write essays. To really understand things means to use words with other people. This is why I don't like online teaching. Because teaching is supposed to be a conversation. And with online teaching, I don't feel like I'm having a conversation. I feel like I'm in the backyard talking into my camera like a fucking lunatic. And I get to hear from you guys on the blog, but that's like later. If I had you guys in the room, I could change what I'm saying based on what you're telling me live. And that's a crucial thing to me because going after knowledge requires speculation, that's thinking, but also discussion. What I don't like about online teaching is that discussions are limited in ways that they're different. They're not. I think they're not as good. Okay, so discussion and speculation is necessary. So, all right, the perfection. The perfection acquired by the finished. Oh, sorry. All the great arts require discussion and high speculation about the truths of nature. And nature here means reality, right? You got to really figure out the truth. Loftiness of thought, meaning like big, high, serious thoughts. Loftiness of thought and completeness of execution. You got to think big and you got to do it correctly. And this, as I conceive, was the quality which, in addition to his natural gifts, Pericles acquired from his intercourse with Anaxagoras, who he happened to know. So the point is that this guy got smart by talking to this other guy. He was thus imbued with higher philosophy and attained knowledge of the mind and the negative of mind, which were favorite themes of Anaxagoras, and applied what suited his purpose to the art of speaking. Right, so he just understands all the different pieces of it. And how did he get that? By talking to somebody else. So he was a great speech maker because he was a great philosopher. He was a great speech maker because he was a great thinker. And this is something that's really important to me in our class, and it's the reason why I give you the Plato, and we do it this way. There's a way to teach this. I'm sure you guys have taken classes like this before, where your teachers teach you how to pass a test. A lot of high school education, for example, involves passing a lot of exams that are given by the state, or national exams or whatever, right? But you have to take these exams. And when the teachers are teaching you how to pass the exams, they're giving you a set of tricks or skills to kind of get through the exam. But you see how that's a bit like Lysias? Because they're giving you little tricks and devices, but you don't really understand the knowledge. Right, you're good at taking. People who are good at taking tests, but they don't actually know what they're doing. Socrates, he thinks just learning how to pass a test isn't real. You got to know what you're doing first. You got to understand larger philosophical truths because it is possible to pass a test, but that's not the same thing as knowing something. He makes a really crucial distinction between knowing things and the kinds of tricks that you can use to get ahead. These are two different things, according to Socrates. And the way to know things is to have conversations with people. All right. So Phaedrus says, we'll explain. I don't really understand this. And Socrates says, rhetoric is like medicine. Well, how so? He says, because medicine has to define the nature of the body and rhetoric of the soul. If we would proceed, and remember, soul means mind. The Greek word for soul is psyche, which means mind. Medicine has to define the nature of the body and rhetoric of the soul. If we would proceed, not empirically, but scientifically, in the one case to impart health and strength by giving medicine and food, and in the other to implant the conviction of virtue in which you desire by the right application of words and training. This is a really interesting idea. He says that writing speeches and talking to people is like being a doctor. Because if you're going to give somebody medicine, you have to know how bodies work so that you know what reaction the body will have to the medicine. Different people might react different ways depending on their bodies, depending on, if they have pre-existing conditions or whatever. It's the same thing with speech making. If you're going to make a speech, you need to know people's minds before you give them a speech, which means being a speech maker isn't about understanding how words work. It's also about understanding the mind. It's about, you got to be a psychologist to give a speech, because just like the doctor has to understand how bodies work before giving medicine, otherwise he won't know what effect it'll have. The speech maker has to understand, people working with words have to understand the soul, the mind, the psyche before giving words, because otherwise you won't know what effect they're going to have. And that's interesting because it turns everybody who works with words needs to know about souls, mind, psyche. All right, back in the next video.